Imagine yourself, just for a second. You're standing in a cold, noisy market square. It's Yorkshire, maybe the 1830s, and you feel this rough rope scratching your neck. It's a halter, like they use for cattle. Then you hear your husband's voice shouting over the crowd, "What am I bid for this fine woman?" People are looking you over like you're livestock. And the strangest thing, this isn't exactly illegal, not really. In the messed up thinking of the time, this public shame might actually be your only path to freedom. Okay, let's really get into this. Today we're doing a deep dive into something pretty shocking, but also, well, deeply human, the practice of wife selling in Victorian England. We've got some source material here that really challenges the simple, how barbaric view. It shows a much more complex picture, desperation, survival, and a legal system that just completely failed ordinary people. Our mission today is to understand not just what happened, but why. Why did this become a thing? And what does it tell us about the price of freedom when the law offers you nothing?
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because beyond that initial horrifying image, this practice, this wife selling, wasn't always just simple cruelty from husbands. In many cases, it was actually a desperate solution. It came about because the legal system was so incredibly rigid, so unforgiving, it left poor people with almost no other way out of a terrible marriage. It's a really stark example of how, when the official law fails people, they kind of invent their own customs. Rough justice, maybe.
Right, and to really understand why this happened, why hundreds of men literally led their wives to market with halters, we have to step back and look at the legal cage women were in. This wasn't just about attitudes, it was baked into the law itself.
That's the absolute key point. In Victorian England, there was this legal doctrine called coverture.
Yeah.
And what it meant was basically when a woman married, her legal identity just disappeared. Poof. The famous lawyer Sir William Blackstone put it pretty bluntly back in 1753. He said her legal existence is suspended during the marriage, or at least is consolidated and incorporated into that of her husband. So she became what the law called a femme couverte, a covered woman, legally invisible, essentially swallowed up by her husband's identity.
Wow, and that wasn't just like a symbolic thing, was it? It had real devastating effects on women's actual lives. Think about a typical working class woman back then, let's call her Mary Thompson, in the 1820s. Before she got married, she could maybe own a little property, sign contracts, earn her own money, but the minute she said, "I do," bam, everything changed. Her wages, his. Any inheritance she got, his. If she ran a small business, the profits were legally his. Even her clothes technically belonged to him.
Exactly. And not only that, the law gave her almost zero protection from abuse. A husband actually had the legal right to correct his wife, like a child or a servant.
Right.
If he drank all their money away, gambled the food budget, brought home diseases, she had no legal standing to stop him or leave him. The law basically said that's his business as head of the house. Yeah. So for someone like Mary, if she was trapped in a truly awful marriage, the law offered her pretty much nothing, no escape route.
That legal invisibility, it just had such huge practical results, didn't it? It meant that for someone like Mary stuck in a nightmare marriage, the idea of divorce was just, well, a complete fantasy. I mean, okay, for the very wealthy, the upper classes, divorce was technically possible, but the cost was astronomical. Before 1857, you needed a private act of parliament. That cost at least £1,000, which is, what, like £118,000 in today's money? More money than a working family would ever see?
Absolutely. And even after 1857, they passed the Matrimonial Causes Act, which was supposed to make divorce a bit more accessible through the courts. But it still cost around £40. £40. That was more than a farm laborer earned in an entire year. So this cost wasn't just a hurdle. It was basically the system saying, if you're poor, marriage is for life no matter how bad it gets. And that's what drove people to create their own solutions, however brutal they seem to us now.
Yeah. With legal divorce completely out of reach for almost everyone, people had to get creative in a grim sort of way. When the official system fails you, you make your own system, right? So for the poor, there are really only a few desperate ways out of a marriage, and none of them are good. You could just agree to separate, but you couldn't legally remarry. Or one of you could just run away desertion, disappear and hope they didn't find you. You could try the church courts for a legal separation, maybe for adultery or extreme cruelty, but that was also expensive, and again, no remarriage allowed. Or, frankly, you could wait for one of you to die, which, given the conditions back then, happened often enough.
Huh?
Or, the fifth option, you could sell your wife.
And this custom seems to have popped up in the late 17th century, probably born directly out of that desperation you're talking about. And it was kind of reinforced by this common folk belief, this idea that, well, if the law treats my wife like property, then maybe I can transfer that property, like selling a cow or a horse. It was this sort of rough, ready-made legal fiction that people created for themselves because the official law offered nothing.
And the ritual that grew up around it, It was so deliberately public. Humiliating, yes, but also trying to give it some kind of legitimacy, maybe, like a really twisted parody of both a divorce and a wedding, all rolled into one public spectacle.
It often started with an actual advertisement. In the local paper, reading just like an ad for livestock, you'd see things like, John Smith will sell his wife Mary at Doncaster Market on Tuesday next. She is healthy, strong, and of good character. No reasonable offer refused. Or sometimes more personal, like Thomas Brown being tired of his wife will dispose of her to any person willing to take her off his hands. She can wash, cook, and milk cows.
These weren't just ads, they were, in a way, attempts to create a public contract where the law refused to provide one.
And then the day came. The husband would lead his wife usually to a public market square, the same place they sold cattle and sheep. Sometimes it was a pub, a tavern. The symbolism couldn't be clearer, could it? Putting a person right there in the middle of a commercial space where goods change hands. And adding to that image, the wife had to wear a halter around her neck or sometimes her arm or waist, usually just a rope. But sometimes you read accounts where it was ribbon, which sounds like this really pathetic attempt to give it a shred of dignity. But that halter, it wasn't just for show, it was the mark. It said, this is property being transferred, just like the halter on an animal. It made the legal implication that wives were property brutally visible.
And the husband, often acting as his own auctioneer, would start calling for bids. What have I offered for this fine woman? She's 26 years old, can bear children, excellent at needlework, and has all her teeth. You can just picture the scene, the crowd gathering around, men looking her over, checking her hands maybe, judging her looks, sometimes even asking her questions. It's just, it's almost impossible to really imagine that level of public humiliation and vulnerability today, isn't it?
It really is. But, and this is where our sources really add a crucial layer. It seemed that in most cases, the sale was actually arranged beforehand. For a long time, people just saw these scenes as pure examples of husbands treating wives like dirt. But the record shows something much more complex was often going on. It really shifts how you see it.
So you mean the buyer wasn't just some random person in the crowd? Often it was someone the wife already knew, maybe her lover. And the whole public auction thing was like a performance, a way to make their separation official in the eyes of the community, even if it wasn't legal.
Exactly. The humiliation was still there, absolutely. But it served a specific purpose for the people involved. It created public witnesses. It made the separation feel final and, to them, somehow binding. Think about this example from Brighton in 1826. A man sold his wife, described as tidy-looking, for £5 to a sailor. And the newspaper report specifically mentioned she seemed nothing loath to go, and the whole thing was done with every appearance of good humor. That suggests this wasn't a forced sale, but probably the end point of an existing relationship, allowing her to start a new life with the sailor.
Right, and there was that case in Willock Market in 1830. The wife was being sold for just 2 shillings and 6 pence, and apparently her husband got cold feet at the last minute, but she insisted. She reportedly flipped his face, maybe slapped him, and said, "Let me your rogue, I will be sold, I want to change." That speaks volumes, doesn't it? About the desperation, sure, but also her determination to get out of that marriage. And didn't you mention one in Plymouth where the wife actually gave the money to someone to buy her?
Yes, in 1822. She essentially funded her own purchase to get out of the marriage. So these women weren't always just passive victims being dragged along. Many were actively involved in arranging these sales. They sought it, however degrading, as their only available form of divorce. They were trying to take control in a system that gave them none.
It's the price paid. It wasn't always the main point. You said they varied hugely.
Wildly. We see records from as little as a glass of gin or a pint of ale up to, well, that one case of £100 plus £25 per child. That's like 18,000 pounds or more today of fortune. But most sales were for much smaller, almost symbolic amounts, often between 2 shillings and 6 pence and 5 shillings, maybe 20 to 50 pounds in today's terms. The money itself wasn't the key thing. It was the public transaction, the witnessing by the community. That's what gave it weight in their eyes. And the halter itself was crucial. After the deal was done, the halter was physically handed over from the old husband to the new one, like a deed almost, proof of transfer. It was their desperate attempt to create a legal reality.
And sometimes they took it even further, right? Trying to make it seem even more official.
Oh, definitely. Sometimes they actually drew up written bills of sale, using language copied directly from legal documents for selling property. There's one that reads, "I, John Parsons, do sell, assign, and set over unto John Tucker, Ann Parsons, wife of the said John Parsons, with all right, property, claim, services, and so on, for her entire life." And often after the sale, everyone involved, the old husband, the new husband, the wife, would go off to the pub for a kind of wedding feast, paid for by the buyer. There was even one case in 1827 where they got the church bells rung. It's like they were trying to build this whole parallel legal universe through ritual.
Almost theatrical. But okay, that covers the cases where the wife was maybe consenting or even driving it. But surely not all sales were like that. There must have been times when it was just forced on the woman.
Absolutely. That's the darker side, and it's important we don't romanticize this. Some were genuine auctions where women had no say and found themselves being bid on by complete strangers. That must have been terrifying.
Yeah, you found some examples of that too, like the carpenter in Southwark in 1766.
Right. Sold his wife at the pub, apparently just because he was indifferent. Then he sobered up, asked her back, she refused, and he killed himself. It just shows the terrible dead ends people were pushed into. Or Manchester, 1824. A wife was sold knocked down, was the term for 5 shillings. But the report says she didn't like the buyer, so they just put her up again and sold her for 3 shillings and a quart of ale to someone else. Now that suggests the woman did have some power to refuse a buyer she really didn't want. But imagine standing there being haggled over like a piece of meat.
And that blacksmith in Halifax in 1837 sold his wife, bought her back, then sold her again to a man who was already married.
Yes, and when the wife found out, the report says she mauled her faithless spouse rather severely, which strongly suggests she hadn't agreed to any of it. These cases really highlight the limits of any agency the woman might have had. It was still fundamentally about her being treated as transferable property.
And the children, what happened to them in all this? It's just heartbreaking to think about.
It really is. The records are often silent on the children, but sometimes they're mentioned. In some cases, they were included in the price, like accessories. That 1865 sale for £100 included 25 ivers for each of the 2 children. A huge sum, suggesting they had value, maybe future labor value. But more often, it seems the children were left behind with the father. Imagine being separated from your mother through a transaction like this, the trauma. And mom's mostly lost to history, but it must have been immense.
Let's try, just for a second, to really picture one of these scenes. Not one of the prearranged ones, but maybe one where it's more uncertain. Let's imagine a woman, call her Sarah. Maybe 28, hands rough from work, looking scared. Her husband's got the rope, he's calling for bids. Men are looking her over, maybe one pinches her arm to check her health. Bidding starts low, a young farmer bids, then maybe Thomas Miller, a local widower she actually knows and maybe likes. But the farmer gets competitive, maybe he's had a few drinks, he keeps bidding higher. Sarah's getting terrified now. This isn't going as planned if there was a plan. She's trying to catch her husband's eye, desperate. Thomas Miller bids again, maybe all he has. Then Sarah finds her voice. She says, "I choose Thomas Miller. I'll go with him willingly, but I won't be sold to no stranger like a sack of grain." The crowd murmurs, some nod. Maybe they respect that she spoke up. The sale goes to Miller. The halter comes off. She's free from the first husband, but still essentially property, just hoping Miller will be kinder. It just highlights those awful choices, the tiny slivers of agency women might grab in a desperate situation.
That paints a powerful picture. And it reflects the legal confusion around this too. Officially, wife selling had 0 basis in law. Technically, it was conspiracy to commit adultery, leading to bigamy if the woman and buyer lived as man and wife. But the local authorities, the magistrates, they often had no idea what to do about it. There's a great example from Ashborough in 1819. A magistrate tried to step in and stop a sale. The crowd actually pelted him with mud and drove him off. And later he admitted he wasn't sure he even had the right to stop it. He said, "It rests upon a custom preserved by the people of which perhaps it would be dangerous to deprive them by any law for that purpose." Fascinating, isn't it? The community's belief in the custom was stronger than the official law.
Wow. And you mentioned that sometimes the local authorities, the poor law people, actually encouraged it.
Astonishingly, yes. In some cases, like Henry Cook in 1814, the parish officials seemingly pressured him to sell his wife because they didn't want the expense of supporting her and her children if they separated formally. It was cheaper for the parish if she became someone else's responsibility, which just speaks again to that power of the marketplace. Markets were where property changed hands, where communities met. By holding these sales there, people were demanding public recognition, forcing their private drama into the commercial sphere for validation.
And the halter, again, making it explicit, this is a property transaction. Didn't some sales even price women by weight?
Yes. Another grim detail, it reinforces that idea of women being reduced to mere commodities in these transactions.
And was this happening all over England? Or were there hotspots?
It seems particularly strong in certain areas. Yorkshire stands out. About a quarter of the documented cases we have from the Victorian era happened there. Places where you had a mix of industrial towns springing up and rural poverty. Maybe the old social rules were breaking down faster there. Factory work was changing families, making these kinds of desperate measures seem more plausible. or necessary, and the community wasn't just watching. They were involved: buyers, sellers, witnesses, validating the act.
Now, you also mentioned this caused embarrassment internationally. How did that play out?
Right. English settlers actually took the custom with them to the American colonies where it popped up occasionally, but it was the French who really seized on it. They saw it as proof of English barbarism. Yeah. French newspapers loved reporting on wife sales, often exaggerating them. You got these political cartoons showing John Bull, the symbol of England, literally leading his wife to market with a rope like a farmer with a cow. It was propaganda, basically, used to paint the English as crude and overly commercial. And this kind of attention really stung the English elite. They wanted Britain to be seen as the height of civilization, so these stories were deeply embarrassing. It definitely put pressure on the authorities back home to clamp down on it.
Interesting. And what about the role of, well, drink in all this? Pubs seem to feature quite a bit.
Alcohol definitely played a part. Lots of sales started in pubs or ended there. The drink, the sort of rough male camaraderie, probably made the whole degrading process seem more acceptable, maybe even a bit of a joke to some of the men involved. And of course, it gave husbands who later regretted it a convenient excuse. You see cases where a man sold his wife while drunk, then tried desperately to get her back the next day when he was sober. Too late, usually.
So underneath the ritual and the social aspects, it often boiled down to economics too, didn't it? Survival.
Fundamentally, yes. For the poor, marriage itself was often more of an economic partnership than romance. So ending it or transferring it also had economic dimensions. The prices paid sometimes reflected that. A woman known to be a good spinner or brewer, skills that could earn money, might fetch a higher price. Her age, her health, her ability to have children, these all factored into her perceived value. People weren't just buying a wife, they were often buying her labor, her potential fertility, her domestic skills. It's a pretty brutal reminder of how economic reality shaped everything.
Okay, so this practice existed for centuries, really. What finally made it decline and disappear?
It really started to fade from the 1840s onwards. Several things came together. Social attitudes were changing. That growing middle-class morality we mentioned played a big part. Newspaper reports started describing the sales much more critically, using words like disgusting, disgraceful. Public opinion was shifting.
And the authorities started cracking down more.
Yes, prosecutions became more common and the penalties got harsher. The embarrassment factor, both domestic and international, pushed them to act. Plus, you had religious groups and social reformers like the Salvation Army actively preaching against it. But maybe the biggest legal change was the Married Women's Property Acts, starting in 1870. And especially the big one in 1882. These finally started to dismantle coverture. They allowed married women to own property in their own right, keep their own earnings, inherit money. Slowly, the law began to see women as legal individuals, not just extensions of their husbands.
And practical changes too, like women having more ways to support themselves.
Exactly. The rise of factory work, while often exploitative, did give some women a degree of economic independence they hadn't had before. They weren't always totally reliant on a husband. And things like the spread of railways and the growth of big cities made it easier just to disappear. If your marriage was unbearable, desertion became a more viable option. You could move somewhere far away and start over, anonymously.
So the last recorded sale was when?
1913, in Leeds. By then it was extremely rare, seen as this bizarre relic from a bygone era. But looking back, the real horror isn't just the ritual itself, shocking as it is. It's what the ritual tells us about the society that made it seem necessary, or at least understandable, to the people involved. These weren't just savage customs. They were, in a way, the logical actions of people trapped by an illogical, inflexible legal system. When the law gives you no way out of an intolerable situation, you invent one. It was the community trying to make its own kind of justice, however rough. A desperate attempt to find agency, to make choices in a world designed to deny them choices.
So as we finish this deep dive, it's worth remembering those women in the market squares. They faced impossible choices, didn't they? In a system that basically denied their humanity. They endured this incredible public humiliation. But for many, it seems, it was also a path to freedom, a really desperate grab for a second chance, a way to escape abuse, maybe even find some happiness.
And it really makes you think, doesn't it? What happens today when legal systems, or even economic systems, fail people? When they don't provide fair or accessible ways to resolve impossible situations? We like to think we're so far removed from barbarism like wife selling. But are there still situations, maybe less visible, where people are trapped, forced into making awful choices between their dignity and their survival? Think about the rights you probably take for granted: the right to divorce, to own property,
just to be recognized as a full legal person. These were hard-won, and maybe built in part on the suffering of people who had no choice but to stand in a market square with a halter around their neck. Market squares are empty now, sure, but those fundamental questions about human worth, about justice, about what people do when the system fails them, they're still relevant, aren't they? What systems are we building today, and who might they be failing?